Hey girls, gays, and theys, and welcome back to the Queer Anne podcast. I'm your host, Nastasia, and I use she, her pronouns. And today I have a very exciting and educational episode for y'all. I got really good feedback on last week's episode that was about gender affirming care. You guys loved it because it was very educational and it helped open your minds to things that you didn't think about. And that made my heart so happy, because that's why I do these things, that's why I talk about these things. And so just seeing how effective those educational ones were, I wanted to start implementing those a little bit more into my content. Don't worry if you're into, the tea, the drama, the trauma. There will be plenty of that still to come. There's still going to be a lot about my personal experiences, other people's personal experiences, stuff like that. Just a wide range in general. But since it is the beginning of October and October is LGBTQ plus History Month, I decided to do a little educational podcast episode on queer history. Because one, LGBTQ plus History Month, what better way to start it off, what better way to honor it than to talk about our history? And two, because it is not talked about nearly enough, it is not covered by our school system, by our educational system. I took APUSH, AP Gov, and this is how much we talked about queer history, queer legislation, all of that. Very little, very basic and minuscule information as well. So it's not a shock that a lot of people don't know a lot about queer history, and it's not a shock that a lot of people are like, well, gay people just started being a thing like in 2015, which obviously is wrong. But if you're not taught any of these other information, if you don't know any of this other information, it makes sense why your brain would automatically think that, because our history has been erased over the centuries, over the decades, and it's really frustrating and disappointing to hear, but I'm here to change it. I'm here to talk about it. Hopefully we all learned something from this, because just researching for this episode, I learned a lot that I did not even know about and things that I wasn't even aware about, which is awesome because that's the point of all of this. And I've actually learned a lot through my podcast episodes. I know that this is as much as it is for me as it is for you guys. Like, I do this because I love to do it and because I love to talk about these things, and also I do it because I want to spread awareness to these things. And simultaneously, I'm also learning, which is brilliant, because these are things that I'm passionate about. These are things that I like to know about. And, the more our history is going to be reclaimed and we're going to teach more about it, the more people will know and people will probably understand more or support more. Anyways, yeah, that was kind of a long intro, because I don't know, just felt like giving a little intro. But yeah, so today's episode is going to be a brief history, a brief overview, summary of queer history. I'm going to try to condense as much as possible, because I don't like when my podcasts are very long, because right now our attention spans are not that long, right? And I completely understand that. So I like usually having my podcast be around 45 minutes, sometimes even shorter. Shorter is ideal, but I like to talk a lot. And there's a lot to cover, and I just want to make a note that I will definitely not even be close to covering everything about queer history in this one podcast episode, because there's not enough time. And I'll probably leave out a bunch of things, or leave out a bunch of, specifics and a bunch of details, because I'm going to be talking about the overview, about a more broad type of history, I'm going to go into details and specifics as much as I can, but due to time's sake, I won't be able to do it for every single thing. So keep that in mind, but obviously I will probably leave you with a lot of resources where you can even go on your own and educate yourself more in detail about certain things if you would like. So without further ado, without wasting another second, let's get into today's video. I'm going to try to break it down into sections. The first section being the beginning of queer history, kind of where it all started. Second section, Stonewall. Third section, like monumental historical figures. And then the fourth section being like monumental legislation. And then the fifth and last section being issues that we still face today and issues that, you know, have been going on for a while within queer people and all of that. So yeah, now let's just get started. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is like the beginning of queer history, of queer revolution, gay liberation movement, etc. Now, common misconception that I understand why it's so common, but Stonewall was not the first gay liberation protest, whatever. It was the most meaningful one, the most impactful one, the one where like most change started happening, but it was not the first. There were plenty way before Stonewall that just have been completely erased. People have not heard about them. Whenever you ask people where it all started, they say Stonewall riots. And that's not true at all. Stonewall riots were not the first, like, movement and protests towards gay liberation and LGBTQ plus, just like queer liberation in general. And it really upsets me that all these other protests have been forgotten about because they hold deep meaning and they all led to, you know, eventually these Stonewall riots, which then led to the entire queer liberation movement and, you know, as we know it. So all of these other ones are just as important, even though maybe they weren't as impactful at the time. You know, people were getting their voices heard, people were protesting against police brutality, against discrimination, and it's important to highlight that and it's important to know that because it's shocking how many people aren't aware of this, and it's shocking how many even gay activists and even gay people themselves, LGBTQ plus people, queer activists, whatever, don't actually know that it didn't start with Stonewall. So I'm going to list a few protests that happened before Stonewall, and then I'm going to like kind of go in detail, not too much detail because obviously time's sake and all of that. And do excuse me if I look away a little bit from the camera. I do have lots of notes because there's a lot of information that's being thrown, so it's just so that I can like have a clear way of communicating it. But obviously if you're only listening to this podcast, it doesn't really matter where I look, but you know, for those who are also having the visual component, just putting that out there. So yeah, the first recorded, I guess, queer protest was actually in 1958, which is important because that is 11 years before Stonewall riots. So that is literally like a decade before Stonewall riots. So this whole decade before Stonewall has been completely erased from queer history, from the queer liberation movement. And that is so upsetting because Stonewall happened in 1969. This happened in 1958. And if I know good math, then that's 11 years. So the first one that was actually recorded was actually in LA. Love LA. Anyways, yeah, the Los Angeles Cooper Do Nuts riot. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that exactly how it's supposed to be pronounced, but yeah. So what went down in this riot is after nearby bars closed, a 24-hour Main Street Donut Cafe became the site of a large riot one morning in May of 1958. Because this one revolves, I guess, around police brutality and police discrimination towards LGBTQ plus individuals, there were two cops who were checking IDs and they were doing like routine harassment and picking up, you know, they started like picking up drag queens and young men. And this situation quickly developed because there were angry bystanders who like were throwing things at the cops because they were actively, you know, discriminating and doing police brutality towards visibly LGBTQ plus individuals, obviously drag queens, flamboyant gay men. And so it started it started there. That's where, you know, the first recorded loud and clear, like, hey, we're not for this, like, queer protest happened. It wasn't necessarily a riot. It wasn't something that was like huge and all of that, but it was enough of a protest. There were angry bystanders. There were people who were standing up against this type of discrimination and against this type of brutality, and that is so cool, because it takes a lot of courage and a lot of bravery to do something like that, especially in times like these when gay rights were nowhere where they are today. So yeah, that is where it all first started. Okay, and then the second one that was shortly after was in August of 1961, and it is the Milwaukee Black Night Brawl. Basically kind of similar, but not really. This was more of a gay bar setting, and it wasn't police, it was a bouncer who was actively discriminating against gender non-conforming people, people of color who were part of the LGBTQ+ community, and just generally people who were meeting at this gay bar in Milwaukee. And then the next one is the 1965 Philadelphia Dewey's Restaurant sit-in. And I guess as the name suggests, it was a sit-in. And because Dewey's was a restaurant that was denying service to LGBTQ+ people, and so they decided to do a sit-in to protest that, and it actually was successful because after the sit-in, Dewey's agreed to stop denying service to LGBTQ+ people. So that is like a huge thing. And how have we not heard about this, right? Like, that's crazy. Then, and for the lack of time, I'm not really gonna go into detail from now on. I'm keeping it all very minimal. Next, it was in 1966. There was the San Francisco Compton Cafeteria riot. Similar, it was also so this was, when was this? Okay, let me see. I'm looking at my notes right now, sorry. Oh, yes. Okay, so this was in 1966, and what happened here was an officer placed his hands on a trans woman at Compton's, and she then responded by throwing her cup of coffee in his face, which I think is such a girl boss moment, and such a slay. And then other people started throwing cups and other stuff at the police, which I guess was kind of like a food fight riot, but like not really. But that's kind of what happened. And unfortunately, the women that started this, especially like the trans women that started this and like other people who joined in on this, ended up being arrested by the police, which is unfortunate. And then there's the 1966 and 1967 Los Angeles Black Cat Tavern protests that happened in November of 1966. And this was also regarding harassment from police, and that were enforcing homosexuality laws. So this one had a lot to do with police brutality, and I think that this is very interesting, like all of these that I've been through so far, because a lot of them deal with harassment from police or police brutality, which is a big thing for the Stonewall riots, which I will get into soon. And then the last one before the one that I talked about is the Los Angeles Patch Bar Flower Power protest. A lot of these happened in LA because LA was a monumental place for LGBTQ people, as well as New York. So yeah, this one also had to deal with police brutality and police like reinforcing discriminatory laws. So yeah, that's kind of it. Don't want to get into like too much detail because obviously time's sake and all of that. But those are, how many, if I can count, those are 7 protests / riots that happened before the Stonewall riots that have been completely erased from queer history. No one has heard about them. They've never been talked about in schools. They've never been talked about in educational facilities. Like, this is like mind-blowing to me because when I was researching this, I thought maybe there was just like 1 or 2 that happened before Stonewall, but 7, that is a lot to just erase. And some of them even ended up being successful, like what we talked about with the restaurant at the end, like actually serving LGBTQ+ people, like that. Those are some monumental changes for that time. So yeah, but now I will be talking about the Stonewall riots, because the Stonewall riots, I guess, are the most well-known riots of queer history, obviously, but they're also not known about enough, and they're not talked about enough, considering how impactful it was, how monumental it was, and yeah, what it brought to the queer community, what it has done, and how it shaped queer liberation and queer rights today. It all kind of traces back to Stonewall. So yeah, let's begin. Let's begin. Okay, let me pull up my Stonewall notes. So the Stonewall uprising, Stonewall riots, started in the early hours of June 28th, 1969. Fun fact, that is why June is Pride Month. Stonewall riots, like as a memory of Stonewall riots. Anyways, this happened outside the Stonewall Inn, which was a gay bar in the Greenwich Village section of New York City. And it was a gathering of, but it was, so basically what happened was there was a bunch of violent confrontations between police and gay rights activists, and that kind of, the tension rose, and it all, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for. It's like at the tip of my tongue, but like there was a bunch of tension, and it all just blew out into a huge riot between police and LGBTQ+ activists. So again, this was about police brutality, police harassment. And the people who were on the front lines of the Stonewall riots were actually Black trans women, more specifically Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. I don't hear a lot of, I don't hear them being talked about enough, considering how much they've done for our community. So that's unfortunate, I think. There are a lot of interviews now that you can kind of find from the Stonewall riots and stuff like that of Marsha P. Johnson speaking. One of my favorites is like, "Honey, I want my gay rights now," and it's like, ugh, queen. But as we know of today, Black trans individuals are the most under attack right now, and that's how it was back then too. But they were also the bravest and the ones who fought for everybody's rights. It didn't matter that, they were in the most danger. They were going to fight for gay rights. They were going to fight for, everyone's rights in general, which I think is super empowering, and it shows how we can all come together. And if we all come together, we can actually make a very meaningful change. So yeah, Stonewall riots actually consisted of 5 days of rioting, which is incredible because, like, I don't know, I find that fascinating because, especially at a time like then, riding for 5 days is a lot. They've received a lot of backlash, they've received, like a lot of threats, etc., etc. So riding for 5 days is a huge deal. So yeah, like I said, we have Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera at the front lines of these riots. So I'm going to give a little bit of background of these two women. So Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera were both self-proclaimed drag performers, drag queens as we call them today. They were prominent figures in the Stonewall uprisings, and they had an unending commitment to social justice throughout their lives in general, before Stonewall, after Stonewall, etc. And they actually founded something that is not talked about not nearly enough. Together they helped found the STAR, which is the Street Transgender. At that time it was not called transgender, it was called something that is now considered a slur, so I'm not going to be saying it. But you can look it up and see the original saying, but I'm just going to say it this way because I just want to be respectful. It's Street Transgender Action Revolutionaries, which was actually queer housing that was being offered to homeless youth, and particularly homeless LGBTQ+ youth. And that is incredible because it created not only a safe space, but also a home to people who didn't have homes, who were being kicked out of their homes, or whatever the case may be. And they were able to house a lot of LGBTQ plus youth and a lot of LGBTQ plus activists through their STAR program, and they've helped a lot of individuals, and that is so impressive to me. Whenever I talk about queer history and I get to like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, I feel like tearing up because they were so powerful, so brave, so monumental. What they did to, you know, fund and to house LGBTQ plus homeless youth when they didn't even have a lot themselves. They didn't have a lot in terms of financially, emotionally. They didn't have a lot at all, but they still made an effort in giving more, and giving to those who had even less. And that is so heartwarming. Love it. And obviously that's when I always speak about like queer rights today. I always am like, whenever I hear, you know, gay people say something transphobic or whatever, I'm always like, just a reminder that Black trans women were the front line of Stonewall. Without Black trans women, we would have no rights. We would be nowhere near where we are now in terms of LGBTQ plus legislation and rights. So stop. Like, just like, what are you doing? Like, these people have fought their whole lives for us, and it's not for you to be fucking transphobic, not for you to be a horrible human being, you know what I'm saying? Like, stop. Look at your history, look at your community, look at your people, and understand what they did for us, and, you know, have that compassion for them as well, because now they're under attack even more. So now it's up to us to change that for them. So, yeah. Now, speaking about the deaths of Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, this is kind of sad, but I do think that it is important to talk about. Marsha P. Johnson's life was cut short in 1992, and her, like, the details of her death remain a mystery, but a lot of people do think that it had to do with her activism and her being an outspoken LGBTQ plus activist and trans woman of color, which, you know, would not surprise me because this was a time where things like these weren't accepted and no one really liked it that much. And then Sylvia Rivera, unfortunately, died of cancer. But like I said, what they did was pivotal to queer history, and especially pivotal to trans history. And they ensured health, safety, and autonomy for Black, brown, and Indigenous trans women, and just in general, like, LGBTQ plus people. And yeah, that's incredible. So I guess, if I know I said this, but I don't know if I like went into specific, so I'm gonna go back to it. Marsha P. Johnson was a Black trans woman, and Sylvia Rivera was a Latina trans woman. So, period. Love it, love it, love it. And they are pivotal figures who ensured the T in LGBTQ. You know, just talking about their trans experience, fighting for trans rights, being influential trans figures themselves. So that's Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, two of the women that I look up the most to in my life, and who I just think every single day. Like, I'm always like, oh my god, they did so much, and it's incredible, 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 incredible. So now that we've went over Stonewall and we've went over some historical figures revolving Stonewall riots and revolving like the queer liberation movement in general. I hate the way my hair looks today. I'm so sorry, like, for getting sidetracked, but like, it looks super uneven and like the coloring does not look that great. If you can, I don't know, but anyways, I'm so sorry. That was just like bothering me as I was looking at the camera. I was like, wait, what? Anyways, that was definitely off topic. But yeah, let's talk about more. So we kind of already went through 3 of my sections, which I'm very impressed how quickly I was going through that. I hope that this isn't too fast-paced, because I know that I usually talk a lot and go into more specifics and more details, but like I said, I want people to actually watch this and like actually have the attention span to listen. So that's why I'm going through this all very, very quick, and there's a lot to cover. So yeah, now I'm going to go into like monumental LGBTQ plus legislation, because it's important. Like, you know, it's important because there was a lot throughout the years, and there was a lot that led us to this moment today, in history, and, you know, and where we are today. So yeah, let's start. I'm going to start with psychology, I guess. I don't know how I would word that, but as you may or may not know, for a while in psychology, homosexuality was considered a mental illness, and that negatively affected a lot of LGBTQ plus individuals for obvious reasons and like self-explanatory reasons, but also like helped like that, and it also like gave people even more of a reason to discriminate against LGBTQ plus people, and gave people even more of what's it called, like even more of like a leverage to just keep being discriminatory. So that had a lot to do with that. And like whenever they would be like asked about it or whatever, they'd be like, oh, it's a mental illness, like obviously like it says that in psychology or whatever. So yeah, and I feel, and people still use this argument that like it was once considered a mental illness, so like it's still a mental illness, like even today. And it's like crazy, because that's not how things work. But yeah, it first got listed as a mental disorder in 1968. So that's like a year before the Stonewall riots. And obviously we see the detrimental effects that had on people. And so the process of eliminating homosexuality from the list of mental disorders began in 1973. When the members of the American Psychiatric Association voted to remove homosexuality from the list of like mental disorders. However, it was not until 1987 that homosexuality completely fell out of the list of mental disorders. So quite some time actually between 1973 and 1987 to like finalize everything and actually have it like set in stone, like globally, like this is what we're like. Yeah, that it's a lot. And that just shows like how confined and like how people were thinking and how much it affected us. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of it in terms of like psychology that I wanted to say, because I think it's important, and I think it's nice to, not nice, but I think it's like, it helps to know that like it didn't all happen overnight, and like actually how much work had to be put in to get it completely out of the list, and like all of that, because before then there was electric shocks and drugs to cure homosexuality, which obviously we know now that there's no cure, and then there was also conversion therapy, which is still unfortunately a thing today, but today there's obviously no cure. I mean, as we know it, there's no electric shocks or like drugs that are being given to LGBTQ plus patients like it was back then when it was considered and listed as a mental disorder. So yeah, I mean, I think that's vital, because so many people before us lived in a time when it was still considered a mental illness, and probably lived in a time where they were given certain medications that weren't tested enough, or certain shock treatments that obviously didn't work, and all that they did was ruin the mental stability of a person, ruin their physical abilities. There's a lot of people who died from these drugs and from these electric shock treatments because they weren't, like, they didn't cure anything, and there would be a lot of side effects like vomiting and just like not, and like becoming weak, you know, all of these other symptoms of like that like shouldn't be happening. And so in a way, yes, LGBTQ plus people started getting sick and started getting mental disorders, not because they were LGBTQ plus, but because of these quote unquote cures that were given to them, that actually started making them like get mental disorders and get serious mental health issues, and also serious physical health issues. Like I said before, a lot of people have died from these types of medications and these drugs that have been given. And it's important to note that, because it wasn't just something that like, you know, oh, it's just listed on there and it's like, whatever, like, sure, there's some discriminatory laws, whatever. No, like, this affected people's lives. This killed people. So it's a lot. So yeah, now that we've gone through psychology, which I think was very, very important, and I felt like it was important to talk about because I've watched movies about it, and because like conversion therapy and everything that we hear about even today of like curing homosexuality, and it's like, hey guys, it didn't work back then, it's not gonna work now either. Like, it doesn't work. There's no cure, this is just how people are. So yeah, now I'm going to talk a little bit about like queer history timeline, which I guess is just going to consist of like some monumental legislation, when it happened, stuff like that. So let's start. I have notes here, obviously, so I'm going to look through them. Okay, so in 1961, Illinois became the first state to decriminalize homosexuality. A huge thing, big thing, because before then, in all 50 states, or how many ever states there was back then, I'm not that great at US history in terms of states, because that's not the focus of today, but it was illegal all across the US, homosexuality, specifically like gay sex and like stuff like that was illegal. And so being the first state to decriminalize homosexuality is a huge deal, and it also is like paving the way for more states to want to do it, because then it like leaves a bad, I don't know what it's called, like if you don't do it, then you get a bad representation, and no state really wants a bad representation. So it was pivotal when Illinois did it, because then it started serious conversations about doing it in other states and just doing it like nationwide. So yeah, now let's go to September 11th, 1961. So the same year, there was the first US televised documentary about homosexuality that aired on a local station in California. That's huge, because that is probably like the first piece of representation that is being given to queer people through media. And it's not just like them going out, finding it on their own, you know, going to queer accepting places and stuff like that, and you know, finding this representation on their own. It's like given to them like through media, and it's like a way that they can feel more like accepted, because they're getting this type of representation that they didn't have before. And even though it was like minuscule and it was only in California, and it probably wasn't, I don't know exactly what the documentary was about, but it probably wasn't like very in depth, and it probably wasn't very long and all of that, but it still like meant a lot to a lot of people. And obviously that makes sense why. So yeah, then in 1973 we have Lambda, I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's LAMBDA, Lambda Legal, which becomes the first legal organization established to fight for equal rights of gays and lesbians. Huge. And later on, the New York Supreme Court ruled that Lambda Legal can exist as a nonprofit organization, which is huge. Like, I'm just saying this all the time, and I feel like I'm like repeating myself, and I feel really dumb when I'm just like, it's huge, it's huge, it's huge. But it is. So yeah, that meant a lot to people. And later on, actually, the same organization in 1983 became the first HIV/AIDS discrimination lawsuit, where, you know, they were doing lawsuits against, like, the government, and how they handled HIV. And also, I will be going back to the HIV/AIDS crisis because I kind of just forgot that it slipped my mind, and I do want to talk about that. So I will be going back to talk about that a little bit before I go into our last section. I'm so sorry, but there's so much happening in my brain right now, and I know this podcast is a mess, but I'm trying my best. And I feel like sometimes messes are okay. Sometimes talking about a lot of things and being all over the place is okay because it's normal. It's human conversation. Then October 11th, 1988 became the first National Coming Out Day that is observed, which is also in October. And it's so fun because this is in October. So, as you can see, then the first legal same-sex marriage in the US takes place in Massachusetts in 2004. 2004 was not that long ago. Okay, so this becomes more recent history. This was not that long ago. And I know that it probably seems longer than it was because time is weird. I get that, but that wasn't that long ago. So it's crazy how far we've come just from 2004. Just from 2015 even, you know? So obviously we know that under the Obama administration in 2015, same-sex marriage became legal in all 50 states nationwide, which was a huge accomplishment, probably the one that's talked about the most, and the one that a lot of people, especially now, are most familiar with because it was so recent and because it was so influential. And then obviously later, in 2023, we have the Biden administration that assured same-sex marriage through an amendment within the Constitution saying that, like, it has to be legal nationwide, and that, like, just, like, ensuring that it's, like, legal, like, you know, it was legal in 2015, now it's legal, like, kind of that states can't, it's not up to states to decide, states can't decide, etc. So that was a monumental time because it ensured our right to get married. It, you know, now it's like set in stone, set in law, like try and ban it, bitch, and see what happens type of thing, type of energy. So yeah, I mean, for lack of like using better words, but I think that I nailed that description of it. So now, looping back, I'm going to be talking about the global HIV/AIDS epidemic that happened. That makes me so pissed because of the way that our government handled it. But yes, the global epidemic of HIV/AIDS began in 1981. Also not too long ago. Like, my dad was born in 1973 and he's 50 years old, so that's like less than 50 years ago. So, hello. And as we know, the HIV/AIDS epidemic does not only affect LGBTQ plus people, which was a common misconception back then, but it did affect LGBTQ plus people more than it affected heterosexual people. So, yeah. This was during Reagan's presidency. I hate that man. That, you know, a lot of this started. And his administration refused to even address this epidemic, refused to talk about it, refused to take any action about it because they believed that it was God's punishment for homosexuality. And they did nothing to stop this. They did nothing to provide health care and health resources to people who were suffering from HIV/AIDS, because they thought that it was only LGBTQ plus people, and obviously it did affect mainly LGBTQ plus people, specifically gay and bisexual men, or men, like men who have sex with men in general. It affected them the most out of anyone else in the population, but that's still not a good enough reason for you to not give a shit, obviously. Like, and it was severe. It killed approximately 40.1 million people, which is insane. It's insane that it killed that many people and that nothing was done. Some of the most famous people that we know died from HIV/AIDS transmission, such as Freddie Mercury from the band Queen, and other like gay and bisexual men, and like so many people spoke out against this, and you know, pleaded with the Reagan administration, pleaded with the US government to do something, to care, to address it, to, you know, get medicine out there, you know, whatever the case may be. But they refused, they did nothing, and they let millions of people die. And that is where a lot of our people got erased. A lot of our people got erased through this epidemic, because a lot of them died. And that is really upsetting. And obviously today there is still the HIV/AIDS, like as a disease, it still exists, but it is not an epidemic anymore. And there's actually a lot more resources out there to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS, and also to just like minimize the detrimental impacts of HIV/AIDS in individuals. And there have been even like rare cases. I think there's 3 cases where like people have had their HIV cured, which is incredible. And it just shows how far our research has gone and how far like we have gone as a nation to prevent HIV/AIDS, and now we kind of actually care. When back then in the 80s, which is unfortunate because that was when it was an epidemic, that was when it was affecting the most people, nobody cared. Nobody gave a shit. And I feel like now with, you know, having had the pandemic of COVID-19, we can really, that's something that's like came close to the HIV/AIDS epidemic, you know, in terms of like it being global and how fast it progressed and all of that. And like we did see that our government didn't really care that much, but they still cared more. You know, there were still masks and trying to get vaccines out there and like all of these preventions, whatever. And like when HIV/AIDS was there, our administration just laughed in their face of people who were dying. They were like, oh, well, that's what you get for being gay. And they did nothing, which I guess angers me even more because of like just knowing how hard COVID-19 was for all of us. And mind you, this lasted from 1981 to the like early 1990s. So a good like 9 years. That's a very long time for an epidemic to last. I mean, COVID-19 was probably like a year, 2 years, and that was detrimental on so many people's mental health and so many people's well-being. So you can just imagine this. So yeah, that I guess is the last thing that I'm going to cover. And now we're going to go on to issues that are still here today, which is unfortunate. But I think that it's also hopeful and encouraging, because looking back at our history and seeing how much change has happened gives me hope for the future and how much change can maybe happen within the future. So I'm going to be talking about a little bit more like well-known statistics about like today's queerness and like today's like issues with like queer discrimination, the more popular ones, the more mainstream ideas. And then I'm going to also talk about something that I learned that I didn't know while researching. So yeah, to begin with, we obviously know that in some states and in a lot of countries globally, conversion therapy is still legal. And while conversion therapy may not be, you know, what they did before when homosexuality was still considered a mental disorder, like meds and electric shock treatment, that's illegal. But conversion therapy is still like, you know, it revolves around religious beliefs, surrounding homosexuality being a sin, it's oftentimes a camp or a house where queer youth is sent to, you know, pray the gayness away. And it's abusive and it's detrimental, and a lot of queer people have trauma from it. And it's upsetting that it is still legal because of how detrimental it has been proven to be for LGBTQ plus people. And yeah, but we still see that that is legal, and that is still a huge issue today. Another huge issue is that in many countries, homosexuality is still illegal, still punishable by prison or death even. Kenya has punished homosexuality through prison. Uganda, we've had countries who, you know, have made laws about this recently, and we've had countries who have had these laws for a while, and they've just been there for a while and they haven't changed, which both are equally upsetting and both are equally horrifying. And obviously I've talked about this before, but I'm going to like kind of just say it again. I don't want my queer activism to be US focused, even though this was US focused, very like US queer history focused. I don't want to just talk about issues within the United States. I want to talk about global issues regarding LGBTQ plus youth. So yeah, it's illegal in many countries, and in many countries, I would even dare to say most countries, same-sex marriage is still illegal, still not legalized, still not in the Constitution, etc. Even in my home country, Serbia, place that I love, place that I call home, it ain't legal, and that is upsetting, and that is sad, because I care about a lot of my friends, and I care about a lot of people in general, and I think that marriage is something that makes a lot of people happy. Marriage is something that a lot of people want and need in their lives, and it is okay to want that. It should be a constitutional right to want that and to want equality, and it shouldn't be a debate, but that's something for another time, because if I get into that, this will never end, and I'm already like kind of freaking out about how long this is. So yeah, so I think I covered well, I guess that, and then obviously this year, and in particularly the rise in anti-LGBTQ plus legislation, specifically from more conservative states like Florida, Texas, Alabama, etc. You know, Don't Say Gay bill, Ron DeSantis's bill in schools, and then also specifically a lot of anti-trans legislation, a lot of legislation banning gender-affirming care to youth and also adults, which all of these are kind of more mainstream and more heard of and well known of struggles that still face our population today. But this is something that I found incredibly like mind-blowing, and while I was researching for this podcast, and I didn't know this, and like it blew my mind, but incarceration rates affect LGBTQ plus adults and youth the most. Out of every single other minority group, it affects the LGBTQ plus community the most. There are the most, like the highest rates of incarcerated people are LGBTQ plus. So it goes obviously like white LGBTQ plus people are like here, and then the highest are people of color that are like LGBTQ plus people of color, and then it goes LGBTQ plus like white people, right? In terms of incarceration rates, which is insane to me, because it just was something that I never really thought about, something that I didn't think, like I knew it affected us, but I didn't think it affected us this much. And like, oh my god, when I found out that it was like we had the highest rates of incarceration rates, I was like, whoa, that's crazy. That is not even talked about. Like, what? It says here that approximately 124,000 adults that are part of the LGBTQ community are in US prisons and jails, and then 6,000 of those who are trans are in state federal prisons. And LGBTQ plus youth representation amongst the incarcerated population, so like compared to like other minority groups or other people who are incarcerated, is double the share of the general population. What? That's insane. And then obviously it affects, like I said before, it affects people of color the most, so LGBTQ plus people of color, and then LGBTQ plus women and girls, and then it goes LGBTQ plus white men and whatever. But that's like crazy. And then also in these facilities, obviously, as we know, they are not very ethical, and a lot of LGBTQ plus people face physical, sexual, and verbal harassment and abuse, and they are also being denied gender affirming care, clothing, personal hygiene products, mental health treatment, and medical care, which isn't specific to LGBTQ plus people except for the like gender affirming like part, but there's still major issues. And then obviously LGBTQ plus people, specifically youth, experience high rates of homelessness, unemployment, and poverty due to being kicked out of their homes, being not accepted by our society, whatever the case may be. So yeah, I think that's where I'm gonna stop. That's where I'm gonna wrap it up. Some of these things were new to me. Some of these things blew my mind. Some of these things I already knew about, but I wanted to like extend my research on. If you guys obviously have any more questions, you can leave them in the comments, DM me on Instagram, or like wherever. Yeah, I feel like I've talked for a while. This is almost an hour long, so I'm going to shut up now. In the future, I might make a part 2 to this, or like extend more on this, because there's a lot more to talk about. But for right now, I'm gonna put a pause on it. And yeah, hopefully this was educational. Hopefully we all got something out of it. I know I for sure got a lot of education out of it. Hopefully you did. Hopefully you don't mind that I was a little bit messy and all over the place and rambling, but I feel like it's not anything new for my podcasts. Yeah, make sure to follow me on all social media at Queer and Podcast, all lowercase and all together, to keep up with the latest news. And you can always, I do a lot of polls on there for like future topics and opinions on things, etc. So it's cool to follow up. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully, if you stayed till the end, thank you. Please give me feedback on what you thought of this, if you thought it was educational, if you learned anything, and yeah, I'm always excited to hear your thoughts. They make my day. So yeah, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next Friday.